Connor O'Gara writing at Saturday Down South, and I don't care what Denzel Washington says to remember the Titans. Football was fun over the weekend, okay? That's all it was. I don't care how bad some of these games might have been played. I don't care about some of the officiating. I watched 6 football games over the weekend. I'm watching 2 more tonight. Connor, for me, that's fun. I don't care what Denzel says.
I agree 100%. You know, I watched so much football this weekend, and while my wife was kind of like, oh, great, football season's back, sarcastically, of course, as I'm sure many can relate to in this time of year, it was such a great time to be able to actually just focus on real football things after the off season that's been. And that's not to say that the stuff that we've been talking about isn't important, but just to actually get mad about certain calls being made and, make fun of Florida State, like whatever it was, it just kind of felt good to be back in that zone.
It did. And by the way, if there's an issue with the wife and football, one thing I have learned in the last 6 years, you won't get the guilt trip after divorce. All right. Now, I'm not saying that's the direction you got to go, but that's just a fact. It is just a fact. So, all right, I got to take issue here. You got Arkansas going 1-9. I know you're picking all the teams in the SEC, and you do as much research on this as anybody else. You're not the only person going to pick Arkansas to go 1-9. And hey, there's going to be some that think they go 0-10. So why do you think Arkansas will have such a miserable first year under Sam Pittman?
Well, let's also remember this is an Arkansas team that, as I've said many a time on this show, has one SEC win in the last 3 years. And in a year in which you're only talking about SEC competition, I think one win is kind of the bar to exceed at this point. And, I heard a lot of feedback from Mississippi State fans who were not too happy to see that was the game that I had Arkansas winning. Some of them got in their feelings. Some of them didn't like that I said that about their team that that has a lot of turnover is running an entirely new offense with mostly a roster that was, developed by a different coaching staff. They didn't like to hear that their team could potentially struggle against Arkansas, but that's the game that I have circled as the win for Arkansas this year, just because I think Arkansas is going to struggle in the trenches, right? I mean, I think we could admit that at this point. I think they're going to be in better positions to make tackles than they were under the previous regime with John Chavis. I like Barry Odom's chances of being able to actually have a defense in the right spots, but I do think that if you're going to beat Mississippi State, or if you're going to beat a team like Arkansas, you're going to do so in the trenches. Mississippi State isn't going to force you to necessarily play that brand of football. They're going to average 50 passes a game. That's what they're going to do. That's what Mike Leach has done every year but one as a head coach. We know that's going to happen. And I think that given the time that Barry Odom is going to have to prepare for that offense, and I'm not saying that he's not, that he's overlooking Georgia week 1, but think about it. You got this entire offseason which you've been so limited in what you can do, and you can watch film, and you can watch film on the air raid offense. And with that being the more winnable game week 2, it wouldn't surprise me if Arkansas has been working on defending that air raid for much of the offseason when they've actually been allowed to. And I think they show up ready to go against the Mississippi State team that still is kind of figuring out what this system is going to look like, a defense that I don't have a lot of confidence in, maybe a big play or two from Keem Boyd, and the roller coaster that is Felipe Franks reaches a high, and that ends up being Arkansas's lone win of the entire season.
A lot of folks around here are targeting Mizzou as a possible win. Ole Miss, I think, is a legitimate chance as well. And I wonder what do you think makes Ole Miss right now any better than Arkansas? And I read what you wrote about them. I like their running backs too. I think Arkansas's running backs and Rakeem Boyd and Traylon Smith. I think Smith is somebody that's discounted. Not a lot of people know too much about him. It's a good couple of running backs. Ole Miss is going to get shredded defensively, and I think Arkansas is going to be able to put up points against them. And in fact, that might end up being one of the more entertaining games of the year because both teams will score 40. But I think Arkansas can beat Ole Miss. Why don't you?
So, last year, we saw how things played out last year, and that looks like a very winnable game on the schedule. Ole Miss lost conference games by an average of 4.5 points. They were the best 4-win team in the country, and it wasn't close. And I realized that doesn't sound like a lot because they were a 4-win team. But at the same time, they played teams competitively, and they were on a different level than what Arkansas was last year. And given what they have returning, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that's going to be a team that's going to be able to do some things with Lane Kiffin that I don't care who they're starting at quarterback, they're going to be able to put up points. They have a ton of production coming back on that side. Yes, I think that defensively, they're going to be the worst defense in the SEC. That's what I've been saying throughout this offseason. But at the same time, relying on Felipe Franks to continuously put up points and not make mistakes is still something that I'm not crazy about. And we still haven't seen what it's going to look like with the situation around him not being ideal. Actually, we have seen that. We saw that back in 2017, and we saw how much he struggled with that. And I do think that he has matured, but I'm interested to see how that sort of plays out. And if I'm trying to rely on him to be able to win what I think will be a shootout type game, that's not something that I have a whole lot of confidence in, and I think that he's bound to shoot himself in the foot at least once or twice. So that's why I think that Ole Miss, given what they return, as long as there aren't any major opt-outs that they have coming up here, I think should be still in position to win that game.
Speaking of Connor O'Gara here on halftime, Connor, when you look at kind of how the Big 12 had a rough weekend this weekend. I mean, Arkansas State beating Kansas State. You had Coastal Carolina beating Kansas. You had Louisiana Lafayette beating Iowa State. Which loss really surprised you the most out of the Big 12 this weekend?
Oh, man, Iowa State. And you know what? I said that despite the fact that I thought Louisiana Lafayette was a solid, really, really solid group of 5 team. That's an 11-win team last year that Billy Napier had, and they finished in the top 20 in the country in both scoring defense and scoring offense. And that's not something that is a very easy thing to do. And, I thought Iowa State, though, at the same time was a sneaky playoff contender. I thought they were going to be the team that we'd look up, in December and be like, wait, Iowa State is 9-1? Thought with what they had returning on offense with Brock Purdy at quarterback and a lot of production on that side of the ball with a well-coached team, I thought they were going to be in much better position, and they could not get any separation against Louisiana Lafayette. I mean, that was a disaster. It got to the point where Brock Purdy is just throwing balls into double coverage because he's so frustrated that his receivers can't get open, and that's usually a bad sign. So that was the game that kind of caught me off guard because I thought Iowa State would be much, much more prepared, and they just were not prepared to face a really good group of 5 team. Now, people are going to say, yeah, the Big 12, this is an awful year, all those things. Look, if the Big 12 is going to be in, the playoff picture at season's end or whatever, it's not necessarily going to be determined by that. Let's not forget that last year the SEC opened college football season by having 3 losses to a group of 5 teams. We tend to overlook that, and it's easy for the SEC to kind of pile on. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the thing that keeps the Big 12 from having this, playoff caliber, playoff hopes at the end of the year or anything like that. But it certainly was not a good look for the conference to lose to 3 different Sun Belt teams. I mean, that's a tough sell, despite the fact that Oklahoma and Texas are really good.
So I think it's safe to say we could put the Sun Belt as a new Power 5 team. Or Power 5 conference.
Sure. You know what? Let's do it. Coastal Carolina hasn't been getting enough love. I've been saying that for years. No, but, I mean, you look at what happened over the weekend, and it's like, oh, yeah, when you have teams that can't tackle as much and these group of 5 teams, that they've been trying to, they've been putting everything into these matchups and having that extra time to prepare. You just kind of never know, and especially after an offseason that's been so weird, I suppose, it wasn't an incredible surprise to see a couple, at least, group of 5 teams come out ready to go like that.
I think the other game that really kind of surprised me, just because we've been talking highly about Notre Dame being what we thought was the second best team in the ACC, obviously behind Clemson, who just put on a show against Wake Forest. When you look at Notre Dame, I mean, yes, they won 27-13 against Duke, but to me, they look like they struggled a little bit. Just pretty much with Ian Book didn't have the best day, and it was kind of a slow start for Notre Dame. What was your takeaways of how Notre Dame looked Saturday?
Yeah, I watched a lot of that Notre Dame game, and I've been high on Brian Kelly, saying it's been really underrated what he's done the last 3 years. I think you'd surprise the average person by saying, oh, yeah, Brian Kelly's won double-digit games each of the last 3 years. Ever since he had that disastrous year in 2016, that team has been really, really good. They were up 17-13 with 11 minutes left at home against Duke. I realized Ian Book lost a lot in the passing game, and it showed. It really did. I mean, they lost Cole Kmet, the tight end, to, got drafted by the Chicago Bears, and Chase Claypool, and they lost their slot receiver. I mean, their Northwestern grad transfer has 5 times as many FBS receiving yards as their next closest receiver. That's the type of production that he has coming back. I mean, it's a little bit reminiscent of what Jake Fromm went through last year at Georgia, where you're just saying that throughout the entire year, like, man, he just does not have that connection with these receivers. And Ian Book overthrew some guys. It was rough for most of the day offensively. And that's a team that just kind of wonder about. And it's, people are going to say if they struggle at all, if they end up going in like 6-4 or 7-3, they were exposed because it's the ACC. I don't really think that that's the case. I think it's more so they have a clear weakness, and the better teams are going to be able to exploit it. Maybe that's a team like UNC or Clemson, whoever it is. But, I think that Notre Dame definitely struggled, and that was kind of eye-opening. And a lot of their weaknesses that were talked about throughout the offseason surfaced in that very lackluster season opener.
Before we let you go, you'd mentioned making fun of Florida State. Does Georgia Tech's upset at Florida State say more about the Yellow Jackets in their second season under Jeff Collins, or does it say more about Florida State in the first game under Mike Norvell?
Florida State. I mean, I'm not trying to take away anything from Georgia Tech, even though they couldn't make a kick, and it was a really, really sloppy win. But my goodness gracious, like the fact that Florida State still can't block anyone. I mean, this looks like the fourth year in a row we're just going to be like, oh yeah, Florida State's offensive line is terrible. No big deal. That's just kind of what you expect week in, week out. And to see them struggle so much offensively, I mean, I tweeted out the stat the other day. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that Florida State, given what it was, at the start of the 2010s, middle of the 2010s, went 53-16 without a touchdown at home against the team that won 3 games last year. Is just stunning. And I feel bad for guys like watching a Marvin Wilson, Asante Samuel Jr., these guys who are doing everything in their power on the defensive side to try and give Florida State a chance to win. And they just continue to find new ways to lose. And the culture, I saw that Kirk Herbstreit had called that out last week, and it's evident in a game like that there's no business for Florida State to lose that game. There's just absolutely no reason that should happen. And I think that for those who are thinking maybe a fringe top 25 team could make a little bit of noise, maybe potentially threaten to have that number 2 spot in the ACC. I think you saw that game in the opener and you're like, wow, this team still has a long, long ways to go, and they're still in full rebuild mode.
Hey, real quick, last thing here. I read where the latest Florida man incident is near your hometown of Orlando. What are you doing impersonating a police officer and pulling over an off-duty cop? Connor, this must have been you. I mean, how do you live in Orlando without having your head on a swivel that Florida man is going to do something to you at some point?
Wait. Why are you assuming that I don't have my head on a swivel? I mean, always. Come on. I'm ready to go 24/7. Like, I went to Walmart yesterday. If you've never been to an Orlando Walmart, I mean, let me tell you something. You always have your head on a swivel. You walk in that parking lot, and you understand that the next Florida man could be a car away from you. You just never know what you're going to run into down here. But hey, they're playing college football in this state, so this state can't be all that bad. And this state and this Orlando, by the way, put on the first professional sports league in the bubble. So I'm just saying, you can throw Orlando under the bus if you want, but we do have at least a couple things going for us right now.
Yeah, it's the happiest place on earth. What's to make fun of? Connor, always enjoy talking with you. Let's do it again next week.
Thanks, Connor.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, guys.
You got it. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, resident Orlando, Florida man. And he's right about that. He's right about it. You know what one thing I think would be really interesting, if we could mix together one of last week's topics, a furry convention in Orlando.
Ooh.
These two things would lead to some really fun stuff to talk about. Hey, if you own a business that needs more security or needs more curb appeal, put this phone number in your phone, 479-782-3936. That's the Fence Man. They can come over really quickly for a no-obligations quote. They specialize in custom installations and been doing it for over 40 years. So call the Fence Man, 479-782-3936. The Fence Man is a division of Quantum Property Services. Get with us in the last segment of the first hour of halftime. 877-377-6963. Right back after this.